this one here that I started writing music in the avant-garde styles, very much more modernistic kind of styles. But for me, I always felt an importance of audience and how much am I what I create, how much is that connecting with the general public, the listeners. In a lot of the avant-garde circles and in the concerts I was always, well, not always, but in many cases sort of bored listening to this music, and I found it, even myself who studied it, I found it all not very exciting in an emotional way. I found that there was a sort of emptiness in there, and also because it was the fashion to be that way, I felt that I had to reach the people. I had to use some common language, musical language, that would appeal to people, but also would appeal to me because I studied the more classical type of music. And for me also, I am an emotional person underneath it all, and I find that it's important to reach others and myself. It works both ways, to create music that's more exciting and appealing. Now, I don't mean that I'm doing popular music in itself, but something that can reach others, and that it has some power to it, emotional power. And that's how I started changing. And I found that I was getting more and more into classical styles of music. You know, I started applying melodies and harmony and regular rhythms, and all of a sudden I was getting quite a bit of recognition out of that. I was getting a sort of satisfaction by the reaction of other people, but also for myself, you know, that what I was writing started to excite me. And that's how I started on that road. The more honest I was to myself and expressing the things that I wanted to express, is I also found that was also appealing to other people, because the emotional reactions I would get from what I wrote that excited me, you know, that inspired me. I found that this transferred to other people, I mean, to an audience. And in that sense, that appeal was there because of that, I think. I sort of don't believe in being totally isolated, you know, that an artist should just write something or create something that's only particular to them. I think that it has some kind of social connection, you know, some thought about society and how the art affects the society. It would be the American composers like Philip Glass and Steve Reich who affected me in the sense of they wrote very dynamic music that had quite a large audience appeal. But they were also going against the grain of what was very much the modernist school. They inspired me to take the route that I did in the music that I write. Because in their case, they kind of applied pop elements in their music. So, the general public can listen to that and they can hear things that they understand in a musical sense or are familiar with, and they would play with that. So I started doing the same thing. Now there is an emotional aspect of music. One can play on the emotions, and they could go very far, where it becomes maudlin, becomes kind of kitschy. In a way, it's like, oh, I feel so sad, and so you're going to do real sad music kind of thing. You could do that, and it can be very simplistic, but you could also, how can I say, is that music can do that to people, can make them sad and make them happy. There's an aspect of music, and it's a matter of knowing how to work with that, but not to make it entirely kitschy or maudlin, but that it has some sense of balance and meaning to it, much more than just to make somebody sad or happy. I was trained as a pianist, that I wanted to be a concert pianist. So I got to play these big pieces, the late Beethoven sonatas, some big pieces of Chopin, all these pieces that had a certain gratification, but also a kind of spiritual gratification in it. And it was a kind of music that, when I was studying, that was no longer considered the kind of music that should be written, and at one point, in my earlier days, I did write very avant-garde music, and it's only later that I started thinking, why am I not continuing some of that classical tradition, which is what pop music still relies on, those traditions, and I just felt like it's we can't just throw all that away. We have to still apply that, because that's part of our culture. It's part of our DNA in a way. It's ingrained in us. That I think there's a balance of the old and the new. So when people hear some of my music, some of it is very traditional of what I've written, but other music that goes a little further, it's like Philip Glass in terms of its repetition, but at the same time, it has more variety of emotions. It goes into different realms of feeling, where a lot of that school, like Philip Glass's, it's always on the same kind of level, and it stays there. So sometimes it's just repetitive music. It can become tedious, and maybe even irritating because of the repetition. So I'm applying certain classical things, meaning the changes, right? I'm never stuck in one thing. I just move on, I don't know what that added thing is that makes something work, and something that that people are fascinated by, that they love and they want more of. I get a lot of that, of people saying, this is what I've always wanted to hear. that they're grateful that I write the way I write. So I could say maybe I fulfill a certain aspect in music that is not being heard enough. I would like to think that I would influence other composers in terms of what I write. I think I inspire some of them to continue in a more traditional route. I did, let's say, those songs based on Gwendolyn McEwen's poems, because I picked these poems because they dealt with sort of metaphysical aspects of life, you know, but what is the meaning of life and reality in a way. And there is love, but it's the love of a spiritual kind of love. That's what she talks about. And I think that's something that other composers should write more of, which I think they do, you know, but not necessarily in the kind of style I write. Pop music, in most respects, seems to satisfy more the physicality of life. I think more the idea of being in love, you know, of being rejected, of being sad because you've been abused, you know, you've been abandoned, rejected from somebody. A lot of pop music deals with that kind of day-to-day type of experiences, where I think in more art music, which is what I'd like to call what I write is art music, a lot of that goes into those realms of spirituality that would be nice if pop music went into it too, to some extent. Like, I think somebody like Leonard Cohen, in terms of pop music, I mean, he was a poet, or is a poet. Yes. Marries those two aspects quite well. And he is one of the few that delve into spiritual aspects of life, you know, and actually even political. I mean, it's kind of social political. It's not like he's talking about one, you know, party against another, but he's talking about the way our social life is. There's a reflection on it. And I think in art music, those are aspects that are dealt with more. And mind you, I've not written a lot of songs, so so I don't have like incredible experience, but everything I have written in terms of songs type of things, the vocal music, deal with spiritual aspects.
To one of your pieces, I think it's titled "Goodbye to Friend."
Oh yes,
and one of the parts is quoting a lot of music from Balkan area. That's folk music or. But I found it very, very interesting because it shows how important our roots and background, cultural background, is for our whole life, and how do you think it is important for artists being based somewhere, know where we belong to, where we came from, and what we can learn from it?
Well, it's important. That's important. I think in the pop world, they do that. They still maintain roots. It's important because, again, when people listen, it connects them to something of their past, of their distant past, that they may not even know consciously what it is. But by tapping into folk elements, that they're like echoes of a past that we inherited. And sometimes in our modern world, we don't know what that is anymore. But by using the elements of folk music, brings that back. It kind of brings you down to earth, so to speak. Or it ties you down to earth. Actually, that's where, when I was talking earlier, is this trying to go back and capture some of the old language of music, in this case, is that because everyone is familiar with a lot of the older music, that if one applies that, it ties it in. You know, it ties the whole thing. In my case, I mean, I come from a Slovenian background, but I must say I'm not Slovenian entirely because I lived with Italians. My parents spoke Italian, you know, so we listened to Italian music and listened to opera. That was just as important as listening to polkas. And actually, my parents used to sing. They used to have friends come over, and this is in Canada now. Yeah, they'd gather and they'd be drinking on a Saturday night and singing Slovenian folk songs, old folk songs that they used to sing at one time. And I never took them literally. I mean, I've never taken any of these pieces and says, oh, I'm going to apply them to what I'm writing. But I think I absorbed all these cultural aspects. So, but in my case, it's absorbing the Slovenian side, it's absorbing the Italian side, but then there's another layer. It's German. There's the German aesthetic that was also, because all that area was under Austria and German influence. And then we come to Canada, you know, it's like then all of a sudden there's a whole other huge layer on top of all of this, which is the American culture, right? And so I look at it more as like I absorb all these things. They are part of me. And what I write, aspects of all of that come out in what I do. It's subtle. It's that there are a few times where actually I could be more conscious of writing, let's say, something, well, like in those songs of Gwendolyn McEwen, I Wait for You. One of the songs is I do it in a kind of blues, very much a blues style, but it's not entirely blue. You know, it's not a proper blues type of piece. So there you have this connection, you know, but I'm just adding something else to it.
So like you said, you absorbing all those languages, and you also trying to preserve them and save. Like there is one piece that you wrote, Fantasia on forgotten,
on lost language, yes.
On lost language. The title is in Italian, so
yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
so,
Fantasia, a lost language, but yes, I wrote it.
Yeah, it's very beautiful, and so it shows that you also trying to save and share what you have learned and all the beauty that you...
Yeah. Actually, that's a good example of applying a lot of this old stuff. That's why I called it a fantasy on a lost language. But it's not entirely just a fantasy, because the piece goes through all these stages, these little... It like gets into a nice, happy, dance-like quality. That may sound like a waltz or polka-ish type of sound, But then it kind of gets all kind of gnarled and anxious and upset, because it's going through these different, it's like a struggle. It's that there's this struggle. No, that's not the only way to do it, kind of thing. So that piece was maybe a reflection of the way I think sometimes. You know, it's like trying to figure out what is the right way, and there is no real right way of what is the latest style or what kind of music I should write. But it's sort of trying to apply all these things, and yet how can I say, the struggle is this the route to take? You know, to use music of the past, or does one do totally modern music, modern stuff that is how can I say, much more abstract and not related to our daily life? You know what I would say, one more thing is I think what I aspire to, I rarely say this, you know, but I admire the big boys, you know, or maybe the big women too. But unfortunately there haven't been great women composers as much as men composers so far, you know. I mean, there are now. And I still aspire to want to be like some of these great composers, because it's not just that they were famous and whatever, is that they somehow wrote music that appealed to people, not just appealed, but it gave some nourishment, some energy to people, that it enhanced the culture and the pride of where people are. So I love Tchaikovsky, you know, and I aspire to have that kind of music, and I would like to be, not so much that I'm going to be the famous one, but that my music will become.
So for that reason, on your pianos there is a score of Chopin edited and published by Paderewski.
Yes. Yes, I still look at the old boys, because they're amazing. It's amazing music what they did. So one can still learn from all that. So anyway, that's.
So.
And it moves on. It goes on.
So you've learned a lot, and you're sharing it with us. Thank you so much.
Well, you're welcome.
We talked to Marjan Mozetich, a great Canadian, Slovenian composer in Kingston.
Thank you.
Thank you.